Good afternoon, everybody. Um, we are now beginning our program. My name is Rafe Sonnenschein. I'm the executive director of the Pat Brown Institute for Public Affairs, which is virtually right here on the campus of Cal State LA, where we've been since 1987, a public affairs institute aimed at civic education and public education, equity and justice. And this is the kind of event that we love to be a part of. I want to briefly tell you what we're going to be doing today and how this happened. There is a movie about an incredibly important historic event, Proposition 187, that was originally started by a committee called Somos California, co-chaired by Alex Padilla and Antonia Hernandez. And our special guest, Kevin De Leon, council member, was an honored member of that group, as he still is. And I represented Cal State LA and the Pat Brown Institute on that committee. And we decided it was important last year to mark the 25th anniversary of the passage of Proposition 187. And after considerable searching, found a wonderful group of movie makers at PBS SoCal KCET, headed by Juan Davis, and they did a 90-minute movie, which not only was shown there, but is going to be shown nationally on the entire PBS network. And you'll be able to watch it yourself. There's a link that we are posting, and it's useful for classes as well as for your own interest. Very briefly, I'm welcoming you on behalf of Cal State LA. We have many students, we have faculty, we have members of the community, we have some elected officials on the line, and we have a great audience looking forward to this event. Just because the movie excerpt you're going to see starts in the campaign, I just wanted to tell you very briefly that on November 8th, 1994, 25 years ago last year, 59% of California voters endorsed the passage of a voter initiative whose nickname was Save Our State Initiative. Became, of course, known by its number, Proposition 187. Excuse me. This was a fairly draconian measure aimed at undocumented residents in California. And I went back and looked at some of the things that are in this. It requires total cooperation by local law enforcement with the INS, which was then called the INS. Anyone working for the government who had suspicions of someone being undocumented was required to report it in writing to the Attorney General and to other enforcement authorities. Undocumented residents would be denied public health benefits, public education, and if found to be enrolled in public schools, would be removed within 90 days from those schools. It was unheard of, but it did pass overwhelmingly, and the only part of California that voted against Proposition 187 was the Bay Area in Northern California. It passed here in Los Angeles County. This was obviously a long time ago. Only a week after the measure passed, a federal judge issued an order, a temporary restraining order, based on lawsuits that were brought against the measure. And those lawsuits continued for about 4 years. And eventually, and Kevin De Leon played a role in this, as you'll see in the movie, the state of California dropped all the appeals and removed Prop 187 from our statutes. So it's a pretty extraordinary moment of history, and it has echoes for today. It was both a different time and the same time in so many ways. And we all feel that it's an important opportunity for students, not just to see parts of the movie, but to hear from someone who was there campaigning against Prop 187, Kevin De Leon, and is now one of the most prominent public officials in California. I want to pass the baton over to the co-chair of this event, Professor Dolores Delgado Bernal, who's the chair of the Department of Latino, Latina, and Chicano Studies here at Cal State LA, and also a professor in the Charter College of Education, someone I'm now getting to know who I'd heard by reputation as an outstanding scholar and leader, and it's just been a great pleasure working with you. Now, I may say before I pass this over to the professor, that's the last time we're going to use titles. It is no disrespect to our distinguished city council member, but I did say, knowing him very well, that he goes by Kevin. I'm Rafe, and Professor Delgado Bernal is Dolores, because otherwise we would spend the entire time essentially going through our titles before we could even get a conversation going. So now, Dolores, you're on.
Thank you, Rafe. I appreciate it. And yes, I appreciate the first name, so we can have a conversation after the film. Let me just say that the Department of Chicana O and Latino Studies are thrilled to co-sponsor this event. It was historic, and as you said, the echoes into where we are today, I think, are some of the questions when we get to the Q&A that folks want to talk to Kevin about. In our department, before we have any kind of events like this, we always like to start with a land acknowledgement. So it is my pleasure to introduce a Native American Indigenous Studies scholar, Dr. Sandra Gutierrez de Jesus, who is a new faculty member in the Department of Chicano Latino Studies, and also Purupeche immigrant from Michoacan, Mexico. So I'm asking her to do our land acknowledgement, Indigenous peoples acknowledgement, and then we'll move forward with the show.
Thank you so much, Dolores. Thank you everyone for being here. Before we start with this event, we would like to acknowledge that we stand on the occupied lands of the original people. Since I am speaking in the framework of this event that we have at Cal State LA today, we would like to honor the Tomba people on whose ancestral lands our university sits. I am currently in Sacramento, the original homelands of the Paduan and Nisenan people in Northern California. And I would like everyone to take a moment and acknowledge the indigenous peoples in the areas from which we're watching this event, and honor their legacy, their spirit, and also recognize their continuous presence. As we honor the land that we walk upon, let's not forget the history of invasion, of colonization, of genocide and ethnocide. And also the ongoing violence, dispossession, and oppression that indigenous people continue to suffer. And also, as Thanksgiving is approaching, I would like all of us to reflect on this history and also be more intentional about supporting the struggles of indigenous communities today. May that Creator continue to provide us all with strength, resiliency, and hope.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to introduce our special guest, Kevin De Leon, and then we're going to go to the movie. So this will be a short introduction. He deserves a much longer one, but I know we want to hear him chat with us. So we will be hitting the highlights. Kevin De Leon is the son of a single immigrant mother who supported her family working as a housekeeper. He's a native of Los Angeles and has been deeply involved in the social movements as well as public office in California for so many years, going all the way back to before Prop 187. He actually played a role as one of the leaders in the opposition to Proposition 187. He has a history as a labor organizer for the California Faculty Association and other organizations. So he is very deeply involved long before getting into politics. His first elected office was as the State Assembly, and he went from there to the State Senate, where he was entrusted by his colleagues with the highest honor you can have in the State Senate, which is to be the President pro tempore, a position that nobody realizes is actually the person who runs the Senate, because it doesn't sound like that's what it is, which made him one of the key leaders of California's government in terms of the budget. And he was a very successful majority leader. Throughout his career, he's been a gigantic force for making California a cleaner state in terms of energy. Among other things, he traveled to Paris with Governor Jerry Brown during the Paris climate talks. He has led the fight to raise the goals for energy sufficiency. Beyond that, he's played a great role in protecting the rights of and opportunities of the Dreamer community, and many other issues that put him on the cutting edge of California politics. He ran a very impressive campaign for United States Senate, taking on an incumbent United States senator, and came very close, which is one of the hardest things you can do in California politics. And then decided to go to an office I consider a promotion in so many ways because I love LA City Hall so much. He ran and got elected to be the city council member from the 14th district of Los Angeles, where we are. So he is our city councilman here at Cal State LA. He's going to be already a big leader on the city council today. He's already arrived, but he arrived already with great leadership ability and a great history. There's so many more things I can say about Kevin, but I do want to just give him a chance to say hi to everybody, start the movie, and then we're going to get back, and Dolores and I are just going to have a great conversation with Kevin. So Kevin, thank you for joining us and taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us at a place you've often called home, Cal State LA, where we consider you part of the family.
Well, thank you very much. A couple of things, Rafe. Thank you very much for that very warm introduction of my person. It's an honor to be here with you once again at the Pat Brown Institute at Cal State Los Angeles. I have a warm place in my heart for Cal State LA, the Golden Eagles. I had the opportunity to go on campus numerous times, but especially when I went and I was DJ for the day, where I brought my selection of music, and it was quite an experience. About played some Los Tigres del Norte, Ramón Ayala, Los Tucanes de Tijuana, and some other things I listened to. And but I love the students at Cal State LA, incredible students. And to Dr. Delgado, Bernal, thank you very much for co-hosting this event with Rafe. It's a pleasure for me to be here. And to Sandra Gutierrez de Jesús, muchas gracias, ¿no? Por sus palabras tan poderosas. Thank you for your incredibly powerful words. Just very quickly, Rafe, as you just mentioned, as I think you just teed it off, we're going to watch segments of the documentary 187. I had an opportunity to see it for the very first time actually today. Not the whole documentary, but the link that you sent me today, which we're going to watch today. And I can say this, for me, this was my political awakening. For many folks who perhaps are baby boomers, their political awakening was perhaps the Vietnam War. It was Watergate. It was Richard Nixon. For me, Generation X, and everyone had their own sort of political awakening if they did have one. For me, without question, it was Prop 187, which we'll get to into details later on. I think for millennials, I think for Generation Z, their political awakening, without question, will be the ascendancy of the ascendancy of President Donald Trump in 2016 as a candidate, and eventually as president due to the electoral college system that we currently have right now. And I think that also to what California has always been on the cutting edge, on the good, the bad, and the ugly, which means we have exported also to a lot of the anti-immigrant sentiment from the 1990s to other states next door, such as Arizona, all the way across the country in the deep Southeast, Alabama, and other similar states, deeply red states, not just in the Southeast, but also in the Midwest and elsewhere. So I'm looking forward to you teeing up 187, The Rise of the Latino Vote, first ever documentary, which I want to thank you and everyone's leadership for making this come to fruition. I think that Ken Burns should have done something like this. This is my own personal commentary, but ultimately at the end of the day, it was us telling the story about us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. I think we all decided we couldn't wait for Ken Burns. So
Yes.
had to go do it. As we begin, I'd like to tell you two things. One is that Cal State LA, to my knowledge, is the first educational institution to participate at the college level in this movie, in showing this movie. I hope that's true, but if not, I'm going to say it's true because I don't know about any others. And
I think you're pretty accurate, Rafe.
It's probably right. So it's very appropriate. Also, I want to alert you that we have posted a link to the excerpt on YouTube in case you have any problem seeing it on your computer right now. We're going to be showing it. We've tested it. We think it'll work. If not, you can play it on YouTube, which the link is going to be up there. And it's just being posted right now. And then just rejoin us in 20 minutes because the excerpts run somewhere between 20 to 25 minutes. With that being said, with no further ado, we're going to turn our cameras off and turn our sound off as speakers, and then we're going to turn it over to 187, The Rise of the Latino Vote, and hope you enjoy it.
It is, in short, for the first time, a deliberate strategy to turn away newcomers and to keep America for Americans first.
So early on, when it qualified for the ballot, the polls told us that every community, including the Latino voting community, would overwhelmingly support Proposition 187. So we all knew at MALDEF and all of the other organizations working against the initiative that we had an uphill battle to convince even our own communities to vote against this extreme anti-immigrant measure.
What was probably the most painful is from time to time listening to Latinos who were like myself, that were born here, and all of a sudden saying, well, you know, it's kind of unfair that these people come across the border and have their babies here. They were buying into the same rhetoric.
I think that Wilson wins at this point unless Kathleen can turn it around. And I think that Wilson does have the issue that has catapulted him ahead of Kathleen, and that's what Chris said, 187, this immigration.
Right, the crime issue is now number 2, and this is number 1.
You know, the thing about all of that, though, is that's really the side issue. What people are saying is our schools are no good, so it must be the immigrants' fault. Let's get them out, and then we'll have the money to do it right. There's high crime. Well, let's blame that on immigrants too. And those are side issues. And I think it keeps both candidates from focusing on real issues that really are of concern to them.
That's when it hit home. That's when it was no more a question of, okay, this is just political rhetoric by some nativist activist who want to get people's attention. It became an issue of, we're in a real fight and we have to organize, because this is going to be very, very difficult to win over all of the voters of the state of California.
So it was a mark of extreme anti-immigrant lawmaking, clearly targeted not just undocumented immigrants, but everyone in the Latino community. If it were ever implemented, it would have affected everyone's right to access government services based on quote unquote reasonable suspicion of who was undocumented.
If you were a racially visible minority, if you had an accent, or even worse yet, if you didn't speak English, then you were going to be asked to prove your documentation, regardless of your status.
187 is an attack, a frontal attack to the Latino community. First of all, because it makes us all suspect.
It would require doctors, nurses, teachers to report to the INS if you suspected that that child or that family were undocumented. Suspected.
And we knew at the time that those suspicions would be based on race and language and name, and it would definitely affect the Latino community in particular.
Someone should be kicked out of the public schools based on reasonable suspicion. Now, who do you think they're going to have reasonable suspicion for? Is it going to be the Canadian or the Irish? Anybody else going to be somebody that looks brown is Latino? So if you want to win votes on crime and using so-called illegals, you're going to put brown faces in those commercials. That's simple.
And we would not only be impacted, physically in terms of some being removed, but we would be impacted economically in terms of our household incomes. We would be impacted psychologically by the disappearance immediately of many of our family, neighbors, co-workers.
187 has divided a lot of people. The feelings of friendship and trust that they were already growing into the city has been disappearing. So yeah, we do have a problem.
Instinctively, you just knew in your gut that it was going to be a devastating initiative to the Latino community.
So I think Proposition 187 did in fact allow for other groups such as African Americans and Asian Americans and Asian immigrants to really think about what it means for other groups to be targeted and what their take is going to be.
This really had a big impact on the Asian community. In the past, we really had to fight a lot of racism.
187 has got to go!
And so what we saw in the Asian community at that time were a lot of individual separate organizations, the Thai CDC, the Chinatown Service Center, United Cambodian Community. And we first started discussing, this issue and what it would do to our community. And we formed Asian Americans Against Proposition 187. We had 60 organizations that were a part of the network.
Asian communities understood that this was anti-immigrant and understood that they were immigrants and that this would negatively impact them if implemented.
It was going to target Asians, but also target other immigrants, especially Latinos. And we needed to stand together. We needed to stand strong in solidarity, even though one segment of the community was being attacked perhaps more.
As immigrants in high school, we did feel targeted, and the tensions were with students that were born in the U.S. It was also Mexican-American students questioning our presence in the U.S., sometimes throwing insults at us, go back to Tijuana, which is quite interesting because I'm actually from Guadalajara.
How can we make immigrants and U.S. citizens equal? All a woman immigrant has to do is have a child. We house them, we feed them, we clothe them. What else do they want?
College graduates from this country can't even get jobs because there is none. There's too many people in this country.
They must adjust to speak English instead of us adjusting to their lifestyles.
So it started to get really tense. And so that kind of tense environment that we saw as teenagers, it was replicating in the political sense and perhaps the conversations that were happening in the homes of other students.
We work hard in this country. We came to work hard. We sacrificing with our families to help these industries and this economy. And you're gonna tell us that we are not worthy of public education for our children? It was outrageous.
We have a population here that has not come to get an education and has not come to this country to get health care. They have come here to work, and they are obeying a very natural phenomenon of supply and demand in the labor market.
The argument constantly is that immigrants are going to take the jobs from African-American workers as opposed to white workers, that African-Americans should be more anti-immigrant than white workers.
Prop 187 would be a financial disaster for the people of California.
But African-Americans have consistently been pro-immigrant in terms of civil rights.
This country was built on slavery and it was built on immigration. That kind of fits the both of us.
A lot of Latinos think that it's in fact racist, that it's aimed at them.
It does not single out anybody and has nothing to do with race whatsoever. It is simply trying to ask for identification for those people who are applying for public services in the state of California.
In the long term, what did work was the fact that Latino immigrants and others began to recognize the racial nature of these attacks.
So part of the racialization, which is historical and part of the continuity, is that this narrative of perpetual foreigner is always been with Latinos. They really think of this group as inferior, and that's a huge difference. So whites may perceive some immigrants to be different, but equal. And for Latinos, they consider them foreign, different, and inferior. So that's how you begin to have much more explicit racialized policy that is specifically targeting Latinos.
First of all, Prop 187 is unconstitutional, it's disgusting, it's racist.
Why are we only concentrating on the Hispanic population?
Because this was a Republican issue, and Republicans are past masters at using race and other sorts of hot-button issues to get white males to come out to vote. This was a good issue for Pete Wilson, and concentrate on this brown guy. That was the reason why they.
Okay, that's your position. That's your position.
But that Republicans were not so anti-immigrant in the 1980s and the 1990s, in some ways for the very reasons that Democrats were divided over immigration.
Do you think the children of illegal aliens should be allowed to attend Texas public schools free, or do you think that their parents should pay for their education?
As we have kind of made illegal some kinds of labor that I'd like to see legal, we're doing two things. We're creating a whole society of really honorable, decent, family-loving people that are in violation of the law, and secondly, we're exacerbating relations with Mexico.
I think the time has come that the United States and our neighbors, particularly our neighbor to the south,
should have a better understanding and a better relationship than we've ever had. Let's address ourselves to the fundamentals. These are good people, strong people.
So it's hard for people to believe that in 1986, President Ronald Reagan signed a bill that was widely known as an amnesty bill, which today would, of course, be completely toxic in the Republican Party, or that Pete Wilson had been previously seen as a U.S. Senator as favorable to increasing the numbers of workers coming in from Mexico and relaxing some of the obstacles to that.
In California, on the Republican side, there was almost unanimous support among Republican lawmakers to vote yes on Proposition 187. But notably, there were significant dissenting voices outside of California. Then Governor George Bush of Texas came out publicly against Proposition 187 and indicated that his state would approach the issue of immigration in a very different way. William Bennett, former education secretary, conservative, came out against Proposition 187, and Jack Kemp, who a few years later would be the Republican vice presidential nominee, came out against Proposition 187.
I think it should be an inclusive party, not an exclusive party. I think it should be a progressively conservative party, not a xenophobic or reactionary conservative party. I believe in win-win solutions, and I don't think 187 is a win-win solution. I think it's a kind of a zero sum.
I decided to actually read the initiative, though, before endorsing it, and I'm very glad I did, because once I read it, I found it was one of the most poorly drafted initiatives ever to make the ballot. It's a completely crazy piece of legislation.
And they warned Pete Wilson and the Republican Party of California from using 187 as the political issue that they did in the re-election campaign of the governor. This is not the solution to the issue. And they were right. That's exactly what happened.
For Democrats, it was a mixed bag. For the most part, Democrats opposed 187. Now, again, they didn't go out there, and when I would hold a press conference or ask them to endorse it, they were kind of reticent. They always had reasons as to why they couldn't do it and so on. It was even harder to raise money amongst most of them.
Nobody was like coming out and saying, oppose it. This is a terrible thing. They would say one little thing here and one little thing there.
So what it communicated was a hesitancy towards our community, a hesitancy to take risk and to stand strong with hardworking men and women and families who were under attack. So that hesitancy really upset us.
This is a country that's based on immigration, and we all know that. And yet, at times, you become so overtaxed, you have to concentrate on saying the people who should be here are those who come legally at this time. And we've got to, for the time being, enforce our borders.
Dianne Feinstein, our state U.S. Senator, took a position basically in favor of 187. It gave license to many a Democrat throughout the state to sit back and not take any action whatsoever against 187 or actually silently support it, even though the Democratic Party itself had opposed 187.
A candidate, Kathleen Brown, did come out and oppose it, but it was too late. It was too late in the campaign to really have an impact.
A lot of us were trying to get President Clinton at that time to join with us and taking a position against 187. He finally got on board. It was a little late toward the end of the campaign. There were already many, commercials and a lot of politics, communication of being pro 187 by many people who thought it was a common sense kind of thing. So the Democratic Party was on, but if Bill Clinton came in late and then more and more Democrats joined us. But very frankly, they were intimidated by it. I think everybody read the tea leaves, as they say, and realized that this was going to pass. It was going to pass in their districts. But what was interesting about it, I was the only Latina on the Board of Supervisors. And so very frankly, I think it was going to be very, very tough to try and convince my colleagues to take a position against 187, which I thought they should do.
When the board took that unanimous stance against Prop 187, I felt really proud. And I know that Gloria Molina played the leading role in getting that vote.
There were small discussions along the way from time to time about Proposition 187. I didn't go out directly and say, I need your support to be against it. That's not the way I approached it. We talked about the issue on a regular basis of what was going on, what were the issues around it, what's going to happen if we have to implement it. So as a Chicana, as a Latina, I was as intimidated as my community was. Should this pass, what this would mean. So it was more about the dangers of this implementation, the issue about the injustice and the inequity.
Good morning to each and every one of you. We're going to start our press conference first and foremost. Prior to the Proposition 187, I had never fathomed the thought that I'd ever become a politician. And in recent years, California has made tremendous efforts to bring the undocumented immigrant population out of the shadows and into the fabric of our society. And this is the reason why we're here today. Prop 187's vitriolic language is still on our California books. And one of my first acts as president of the California State Senate was to remove all the records of Proposition 187. SB 396 will remove all unconstitutional provisions of Proposition 187 from California codes so that we can move forward and away from the racial wedge politics that once divided our great state. Those wordings didn't have any teeth, any legal teeth behind it. They were still symbolically part of our state codes, and that's why it was so important that we strike it. And it was a surreal yet a very powerful moment for me. California has a long, troubled history with minority groups, but it has taken affirmative, positive, proactive steps to repeal and apologize for past discriminatory laws.
En un terminante rechazo a las políticas antiinmigrantes del pasado, el gobernador Jerry Brown firmó la ley SB 396, que revoca por completo los mandatos de la Proposición 187, que nunca pudieron ponerse en efecto.
Where California is today and how people view California today is a direct result of how our community has responded to Proposition 187. A huge difference, and you see it, not just in terms of our representation in the congressional delegation and the legislature and county and city governments up and down the state, but more importantly, by the policies that are prioritized and passed because we are now more involved at all levels of politics and government in the states.
Para aquellos estudiantes que están en high school o en preparatoria, es una noche importantísima.
The financial means so that they can continue their education.
In this society, the key to success is education.
We're about to embark on an historic expedition here in California to curb greenhouse gas emissions and be a leader in the world.
State legislators are winding down the summer session, but not before passing the controversial California DREAM Act.
California Governor Jerry Brown recently signed into law the ability for undocumented students to have access to state public funds for higher education.
And Governor approved AB 60, which allows for driver's licenses to be issued to those in the country illegally in an effort to improve safety on the state's roads.
By signing this bill, California remains a global leader in climate change.
Governor Brown today signed new legislation into law dramatically increasing the state's climate change goals.
A landmark legislation signed in California making it a sanctuary state.
We will protect those who have contributed to making California the 6th largest economy in the world.
It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen because it's always been this way. The movement in 1994 against Pete Wilson and against Proposition 187, I believe, really was the turning point and the catalyst to move California from where it was, which was a very conservative state, to where it is today, which is the most progressive state in the country.
In California, there are 186 partisan offices, which means when you run as a candidate, you have to identify as either a Republican or a Democrat or some other political party. In 1994, of these 186, 50% were held by Democrats, 50% were held by Republicans. You fast forward to 2019, 2020, 80% are not held by Democrats and 20% are not held by Republicans. You could see the dramatic change. Not only Latinos, not only Asians, but African Americans, working people, whites, young people do not forgive the Republican Party for what they try to do to this great state.
So California has made tremendous progress over the last 25 years, but we still got a lot to do. We should be very aware of the shortcomings that we've got.
The Latino community in particular, as president and general counsel of MALDEF today, I know that our Latino community does not have the representation that it should have in leadership in the corporate sector, in the higher education sector, in the media sector. So we have challenges, not just for those of us in California today, but for those throughout the nation who are facing unprecedented levels of fear inspired by anti-immigrant lies and rhetoric.
In terms of the national landscape, unfortunately, Prop 187 became the blueprint for really horrendous anti-Latino policy.
On this vote, the yeas were 239, the nays were 182. The bill is agreed to. The bill is passed without objection.
Hoy continuaron las manifestaciones en contra de la HR 4437.
In downtown Los Angeles, Latino immigrants marching shoulder to shoulder. It was known as La Gran Marcha, the Great March.
More action is expected to come across the country as the bill is debated in Congress.
The sun is hot in Arizona, all week pushed and pulled by opponents and supporters of the toughest anti-illegal immigration law in the country. The law passed with unanimous support from Republican legislators.
It represents what's best for Arizona.
Enough is enough.
Alabama's tough new immigration law went into effect today.
I'll do anything short of shooting them because illegal aliens need to quit taking jobs for American citizens.
Governor Robert Bentley promises enforcement will begin right away.
It is a tough bill. It is the toughest bill in the country, but we wanted a tough bill.
The legal case against 187 has established the basis for challenging so many anti-immigrant laws throughout the 25 years since then. So it was important to prevent 187 from being replicated in other states.
We are in a very unromantic movement in American history. Racism, anti-immigrant hysteria, nativism is just at a high level, one of its highest levels. It's offensive, it's obscene.
15 to 20 people were killed in a mass shooting in El Paso.
The shooter describes himself as a white nationalist,
expressing anti-immigration views.
This was a hate crime.
Currently, as we speak, we have refugee people running and fleeing from violence. We have children and families stuck in detention centers.
Cages, chain link fences, zero tolerance policy, calling for parents and their children to be separated if they cross the border illegally.
Right now, in many ways, the United States is going through what California went through in the early 1990s. Demographic distance and anxiety, economic uncertainty and the search for scapegoats, and a kind of politics of opportunism that don't build political strength to really sustain.
We're standing up. We're standing up for what's right, for our parents, for our communities, for our children. We're going to keep going and we're going to keep fighting.
We have come here to see to it that this new initiative, Save Our State, never passes through.
For those who still can't comprehend because they refuse to, fight for your lives before it's someone else's job.
The people will always be here to rise up and speak. Just as they did 25 years ago, here we are today, still continuing like that fight of our human rights overall and our humanity.
Organized by the Black Student Union at the University of Oregon.
Minneapolis has become a beacon.
The route ahead for America should probably be the route that we took here in California to move past the racial animus that is gripping the nation right now.
They keep coming.
Over 60,000 were found to be hardened criminals. This is a national security issue.
Illegal immigration is hurting America. The crime, the cost. Bevin says no to sanctuary cities.
Criminals take advantage of weak laws, like giving driver's licenses to illegal immigrants.
And on the other side of that fence, it's the murder capital of the world. When crime spills over, I prosecute.
I got a big truck just in case I need to round up criminal illegals and take them home myself. If you want a politically incorrect conservative, that's me. Yeah, I just said that.
Wow. I have watched the documentary a couple times all the way through. For those who watched it with us just now, that was chapter 2 and 5. It's a powerful teaching tool. So I know faculty in our department will be using it. I want to start our discussion off. I guess in watching that the couple times that I've watched it through, it took me back to that time period, a lot of emotion, a lot of memories. Kevin, I was a graduate student at UCLA at the time. And so organizing with other students, I remember we did a teach-in in Moore Hall. And I remember the feeling when the final results came in, even though everyone was saying we expected it, all those folks that were working for it, it was still devastating when those results came into me. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about where you were in your life and career during that year of Prop 187, and then say a little bit more about how it actually affected you and your life.
Well, thank you, Dolores. I was a few years earlier. I was a student at the University of California at Santa Barbara for my undergraduate studies. And suffice it to say, I didn't do well academically. I was on probation 3 consecutive quarters. So I was effectively kicked out of school, financially withdrawn. And I didn't know what to do. And I was embarrassed. I didn't want to go back home. My mom would say, like, what are you doing here? I just graduated from college, Mom. I just did it in 3 quarters straight consecutively. I already got my BA. You have a very smart son, And a friend of mine said, well, why don't you teach English as a second language? And I said to him, how can I teach anybody? I just got kicked out of school. I don't know how to teach anything to anybody, But I started teaching ESL, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 immigrants. And then I had roughly about 500 students a night with various teachers who I employed. And I was working at an organization that was headquartered in the heart of Boyle Heights on the corner of Esperanza and Whittier Boulevard, one-stop immigration and educational center. And working at this nonprofit organization, and Fabian Nunez, who was part of this documentary, as well as Juan Jose Gutierrez, who was the executive director, we started hearing, rumors about this initiative, folks collecting signatures to deny immigrants, young immigrants, access to public services. And we didn't believe it at first. We thought maybe a lot of political hyperbole, a lot of political exaggerations. And then little by little, the news media started covering it. And then little by little, we realized this is actually something that's real. We don't know if it's going to qualify for the ballot before the electorate, but once it did qualify for the ballot, I was in my 20s. There was anger, a lot of deep anger about sort of delegitimizing our presence and who we are and what our contributions have been. And being the youngest child of a single immigrant mother with a 3rd grade education, a woman who taught me the value of hard work and her very strong work ethic, a woman who cleaned homes in a very wealthy enclave in La Jolla, California, with a beautiful panoramic view of the Pacific Ocean, and took care of very wealthy people in their elderly stage. It angered me that they were targeting people like my mother and millions like her, throughout California, that we were the reasons why the economy was going through the tubes, and that they should pretty much outlaw our presence. Because although the supporters of 187 said, well, this has nothing to do with you, this has to do with illegal immigrants. And they were trying to sort of separate with a surgical knife in a very clean way, as they thought. But this was a metaphor. This was against all of us, people of color, Latinos, people who speak a different language, who look, physically different to what the mainstream is perceived to look like. So there was a lot of anger, a lot of, obviously in our community, a lot of fear, incredible amount of fear, a lot of just, I think that the documentary really captures it well, a lot of tension, a lot of finger pointing, a lot of overt forms of discrimination and racism that 187, similar to today with the ascendancy of Donald Trump to the White House, sort of kind of gave license to folks to say things overtly, behave in a manner that, they may have thought it and felt it, but that was one thing. One thing was acting upon it and verbalizing, and calling people names and putting them down very overtly and openly as if it was nothing, And so there was a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, a lot of tension, and clearly a lot of fear among our immigrant communities.
Yeah. Oh, Rafe, you are muted.
Rafe, you're muted.
Just to follow up, Dolores, on that, one of the questioners said, wrote and said that it was the first time their parents talked about politics at home. It was during 187, and asked a really good question, which was, what is it that hit the whole community such that people had the feeling you had? I mean, not just young people, but folks who had probably been trying to keep their heads down and not get involved too much. And I mean, there was plenty of negative stuff before 187. Why 187? Why did it have such a special impact?
Well, let me say this. Let me backtrack just a little bit, which I want to give some context to the ascendancy of 187. I don't hear folks often say this, or connect it to. I don't know if everyone will agree with me, but 187, obviously, and the downfall of the former Soviet Union towards the end of 1991, when the Soviet Union was dissolved, and you had this Cold War, the United States versus the Soviet Union, and a large infusion of taxpayer dollars into the military-industrial complex. So now all of a sudden the Soviet Union has dissolved completely. There's no longer this Iron Curtain, there's no Soviet Union. And as a result, the Department of Defense military budget was reduced quite dramatically. But for California, especially Southern California, we had a large, one of the largest, if not the largest, aerospace industry in the country. And as a result, you had a lot of hardworking, Californians with perhaps no higher education, maybe a high school diploma, have good, solid jobs that paid the bottom a house that allow them to send their kids off to college. Now you have a downsizing the aerospace industry, and you have a very severe economic recession. But it was especially acute in Southern California, where a lot of folks lost their jobs. And as a result of losing their jobs, there was a sense of anxiety, panic, angst among the electorate, with unemployment and underemployment increasingly dramatically so, and also to inflation outpacing stagnant wages. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the electorate, panic. And all of a sudden, you had politicians who are not able to articulate to the electorate as a whole as to why economically we're in the situation that we're in. So you have a group of nativists from Orange County bang, the bell, I should say, sort of a whistle, a dog whistle to the rest of the electorate. Hey, we need to outlaw immigrants, undocumented immigrants, from being in California, because they are the reasons why we're in the economic situation that we are today. And then you have the politicians, primarily Republican politicians headed up by Pete Wilson, who gave it a face, decide to say, hey, I'm going to run with this. I'm going to get ahead of this circus, and I'm going to ride this all the way to my electoral re-election for governor. So this is very important, because it's like saying that the Soviet Union collapses. I lost my job. They foreclosed my house. I got a divorce as a result, all the social impacts on the family. But it was because of Maria, who is the babysitter to Montana or Brooklyn, who lived in Pacific Palisades, or who live in Sherman Oaks or Encino? Or is it because Esteban, who is a sous chef in a restaurant in Santa Monica? I lost my job at Boeing because of Esteban. and the politicians and how they manipulated the electorate as a whole. And they took advantage of the racial undercurrents, which were not undercurrents any longer, but so overt. And then that's what pitted one community member against another community member in the state of California, which is very instructive, which I think is very important to sort of understand what the environment was like pre-187 and how the economy, played a huge role, and politicians coming in and effectively manipulating one electorate against another electorate and saying, hey, the reason why you lost your house, you lost your family, you lost everything is because of those people. They look different, they speak different, they come from a different country, they're foreign, and even if they were born here, whether they're born in East LA, Boyle Heights, or Pacoima, or Santana, or elsewhere, even if they're born here, it's all part of the same group anyways, So we can outlaw them, we can have our economy, you can have a job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it was scapegoating at its very worst.
That let me add to that. So that scapegoating, that's a really helpful context, I think, for everyone, Kevin. What in the full documentary, Gloria Molina and others talk about Latinos who voted and how painful that was. And I think in our department, a lot of faculty would teach about this and talking about internalized racism, a colonized mind that begins to do this within a context that you just outlined, but really focusing on Latinos. I'm wondering if you'll say a little bit about that, because we saw that with 187 in the numbers of Latinos who voted for it, and what we're seeing right now in terms of the Latino vote for Trump. And clearly we know there's a big difference between Florida and California, but we do see Latinos voting, people of color in general, even though African-American males only voted 16% for Trump. That more than doubled what it was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you just say a little bit about that context you gave, and then when you make it specific to Latinx populations.
Well, with regards to Latinos, and I want to put this in context, because back in 1994, the Latino voter universe was not large in comparison to what it is today. And when you sort of disaggregate the data, there weren't a large subset universe of very high propensity Latino voters that could significantly make a huge impact on the outcome of elections. So there was a percentage of Latinos, unquestionably, who voted for Proposition 187, a huge disappointment nonetheless. And going back, and I won't go back into the internal colonized mind, or talk about Frantz Fanon and Wretched of the Earth, and sort of kind of growing up. I grew up in San Diego, and I grew up in Tijuana, so I grew up in a border area where the Border Patrol was very, very prevalent. They were very prevalent, always cruising around. Not forget about raids. I mean, they were physically present every day, just cruising around in their green and white vans. And as a very young age, I can remember at 4 or 5 years old, we were already sort of always on the alert para la migra, and if we saw a green, white van, I would grab my mom's hand and say, vámonos, vámonos, ahí viene la migra. So at a very young age, there's many young children who are already wired to always be on the lookout, for anybody who would threaten our family. In this case, obviously, the U.S. Border Patrol. And it has been well known in our community that some of the worst Border Patrol agents have actually been Latino. And the question becomes, well, why? Is it that internal colonized mind? Is it that to prove myself to my brethren within the rank and file members, if he gives one lump on the head to a Latino, do I have to give 2 or 3, 4 lumps on the head on the Latino so I could be accepted as one of them? And that's something that's even deeper psychologically with regards to low self-esteem that some folks may have. Maybe you're ashamed of who you are. Maybe you're ashamed of where you come from, but I don't believe that the majority of Latinos voted, obviously, for 187. There was a percentage that voted for 187, but a lot of the narrative is fast forward to 2020 presidential elections, where I have been told, wow, what happened with Latinos, and how come Latinos voted, in such large numbers for Donald Trump? I said, well, no, actually, no. When you think about it, 2/3 or more Latinos actually voted for Joe Biden. Now, if you wanted to disaggregate the data, and to your point, Dolores, and go to Cuba, not Cuba, but go to Little Miami, Little Havana, in Miami, and disaggregate data, we can do that, but the majority of Latinos actually voted overwhelmingly in opposition to Trump and for Biden. African Americans, overwhelming numbers. Asian Americans, overwhelming numbers. Native Americans were 50-50 across the board. But the three major minority groups, Latinos, African Americans, and Asian Americans, voted overwhelmingly in opposition to 187. The one group that did not vote in majority numbers in the United States of America as an aggregate, or who we know, it has been white men and white women. So that's a big question. So sometimes we fall into that narrative trap. What's wrong with Latinos? How come you didn't vote 90, 95%? And that's a false narrative, to fall into. There were Latinos who voted against 187. There were Latinos who voted for 187, but we always knew, and this is very important, we were not elected officials at the time, but we always knew, not instinctively, that 187 was going to pass. We didn't have the political machine that we have today, or maybe machine is not the right word, the political numbers that we have today. We always knew that 187 was going to pass. And that's why we organized what was then the largest march in the history of California, because it was a release for so many folks who, number one, couldn't vote, were not eligible to vote, but felt very impotent that they're attacking me, they're attacking my family, they're attacking my livelihoods. I contribute greatly. We're a pillar of economic strength for the state, yet we're being scapegoated and I can't vote my conscience because I'm not eligible yet. So we organized the march. And that march was a huge, huge psychological release also for hundreds of thousands of people who were not eligible to have an impact on the outcome of this race. Oh, I should say not the race, but of the outcome of the election of 187.
So Kevin, a number of people are asking about Proposition 16 and its solid defeat in the election. And one of the people asking a question made an interesting point. They said the movie suggests that California was not a progressive state then, but it's a progressive state now, which would be nice if that, that kind of simple change had happened. Clearly, things move in fits and starts, and every organization in California politics and government endorsed Proposition 16. I mean, it had the kind of support the opposition to 187 never really had, the kind of unified across the board. And it pretty substantially failed, and it failed in a number of communities unexpectedly. What did you make of that? By the way, for those of you listening, that's that would have restored affirmative action and repealed an earlier measure, Prop 209. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that let me go to one point that you made, and one point that was made in the documentary, that California has not always been a progressive blue state, and that's true. From the Chinese Exclusion Act, which actually passed first on the green carpet and red carpet of our state capital before it became federal law in Washington, D.C. We originated the Chinese Exclusion Act in California. When it came to Westminster, Mendez versus Westminster, which was a precursor legal case of Brown versus the U.S., in the segregation case that then the NAACP, Thurgood Marshall, who came out to California to be a party of to this legal case. So we've had Proposition 187, 209, 227, anti-bilingual education. The 90s was a very dark decade for people of color and the most marginalized. Again, 187, we're talking about 209, repealing affirmative action, as if university campuses, UCLA, UC Berkeley, were overrun by a huge number of people of color. They were still in the single digits in terms of admissions to the university, which, by the way, I proudly am a beneficiary of 187. If it wasn't for of that too, becoming, an elected official. But if it wasn't for affirmative action, I would never have been an elected official, hands down, period. If it wasn't for affirmative action. Then you had anti-bilingual education, 227. And then on the issue of Prop 21, you had the Costa-Hawkins Act, that did not allow local governments to have rent control. And you say, how's that correlate with people of color? Well, the vast majority of people of color, Latinos and immigrants, are renters. They're not owners. And so this had a huge impact. Now, fast forwarding it to 2020, and why the failure of Proposition, 16. It is deeply unfortunate. It is sad for me that we couldn't easily repeal Prop 16 with no moneyed opposition against it. I think that the language was very technical. I think the language was very confusing for the electorate. I had family members who texted me literally and said, "Hey, I'm gonna vote no, right, on 16, right?" And I'm like, wait, hold on. And I call him, ¿Qué pasó? ¿Qué está pasando aquí? No. We read the title, ballot and summary, and it says that it's going to discriminate against, Latinos. So we're going to vote no, right? And so no. You're going to vote yes. You're going to vote yes. And I explained to go, oh, okay. Sometimes, we don't do ourselves, a service, when we make technical legal language so confusing. So confusing. So I think that we should do another go at affirmative action in the near future, and I think it has to be very clear and coherent so the electorate as a whole can understand the true benefits of what affirmative action has done for a great state like California.
There's a question that's kind of personal on here, Kevin, and I want to go ahead and read it to you and see if you have insights you can share on this. Somebody writes, the nature of this question is somewhat personal because I had been here 4 years in this country when Prop 187 happened. And just now, as I watched the excerpts of the documentary, I experienced some form of PTSD and actual emotional pain remaining from those days. One thing that's worked for me is to be politically active. But as part of the Latino community, how do we heal from severe PTSD by being targeted by such hatred? Even today, targeted as I feel by the present administration, how can I, as part of a community, prevent experiencing PTSD or other emotional consequences, not only personally, but how can I participate in the healing? I guess the healing of a community is really what this person is getting at. How do we do that? And one way, of course, is that activism.
Yeah, I hear what this person is saying because duele mucho, and because duele that a politician's responsibility, regardless of where you're at on the political spectrum, is to move policies that improve the human condition for all individuals, and that means different things to different people. But the very idea that we could take a concept of an idea and move it forward through a ballot initiative process, and have the electorate as a whole decide up or down whether we allow young children in kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade to attend public schools, or authorize, deputize legally that public school teacher will single out which students are undocumented and which are not, report them to the principal. The principal would be legally authorized and bound to report them to the superintendent, and the superintendent to what was then INS, which today is ICE. The very idea that the electorate would decide that, the very idea that, for example, on 227, an issue that's pedagogy, the folks who have doctorates like you all, who know much better than us on the issue of pedagogy, that pedagogy would actually be up for a debate. Like, debate's fine, but for an affirmative vote, whether we move forward with more languages, is bizarre. And I know a lot of folks who believe that ballot initiatives are the people's vote. It's about democracy. They decide or not. Hey, listen, bottom line is this. There's some issues that people should not be deciding because it impacts our economy. It impacts our livelihoods. It impacts who we are. The PTSD that some folks are sensing and feeling from watching this documentary, that takes you all the way back to how tense it was, that my very physical presence bothers other people so badly that they would actually try to legalize my removal from this country. That is just mind-boggling and quite stunning. And that is the power that politicians and movements have, in this case, for the very, very worst, that vitriolic, xenophobic, polarizing, polemic, no shame, sinvergüenza, no shame at all whatsoever, unwillingly and unknowingly how to articulate to the electorate, listen, we're in a very bad economic spot right now. And unemployment has spiked quite dramatically. And these are the reasons why. And this is my policy platform as to the reasons why we're going to get out of this economic recession and move forward. And there's going to be on the near horizon a better day for all of us, regardless of the color of your skin and regardless of who you are. But instead of that, what we find is, again, you know, Dolores, you know, Alejandra, Carmela, it's because of them, that seamstress working downtown in a sweatshop, you know, who's making minimum wage or below minimum wage, you know, in the worst working conditions one could imagine. It is because of her that you lost your house and you lost your car and everything that you identify yourself with as an individual. And that is the power of politicians and what they do and how they manipulate electorate. Very similar at a macro level in battleground states in 2016 with the ascendancy of Donald Trump, with individuals who've been, you know, unemployed for a very long time or underemployed for a very long time. The power of global forces when it comes to globalization. And all of a sudden, I can't pay the rent, I can't pay the mortgage, I can't put food on the table, I can't put clothes on my children's back. And someone comes in and says, hey, because of those people over there. And what happened at a national level in 2016, writ large, is what happened here, you know, 25 years ago in California. And that's why, you know, when it comes to the PTSD, I'm not obviously an LCSW, you know, so I'm the last person you want to ask for any psychotherapeutic sort of kind of like, you know, services, what have you, et cetera. But in that sense, we all need therapeutic services to deal with the anger, to deal with the shame, to deal with the resentment that we were all being targeted just because of who we are and where we come from. And actually demonstrating to the rest of the world, hey, you know what? We actually belong here. And this state, this country belongs to us just as much as it belongs to anybody else. But you have to own that space, because if you don't own that space and you give up that territory for others to define that narrative for us, then we're always going to be at the short end of the stick. We'll always be on the losing end. This is our country. This is our state. This is our city. It belongs to us. And therefore, we're going to move forward together with everybody else, arms locked together in solidarity to make a better society for all of us, regardless of who we are and where we come from.
Thank you, Kevin. That's really beautifully stated. And I think important, and you raised a few things here, which is politicians can make a difference. And if a couple of the questioners, and you would probably know better than we would, asked what you think a new administration can do or will do. And I would add to what Dolores was reading, the other questioner, what can a new president and vice president do without necessarily controlling Congress that can affect that feeling of fear and helplessness out there? And I sometimes wonder, when you're 3,000 miles away, do you live in this kind of abstract policy world, or do you think about the fact when you're in Washington, D.C., that you could be helping somebody at Cal State LA who spent last week terrified during the election period, not knowing what was going to happen? I wonder, I mean, if you sat down with President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris, which you probably will, what would you tell them they should do first that would make the greatest difference to unwind some of the horrific things that have gone on recently?
Well, I think that you know, there's a lot. We're waiting to see what happens January 5th. The two U.S. Senate seats in Georgia.
Correct.
If we're fortunate enough to win 2 Senate seats, then there'll be a 50-50 tie, and you'll have, you know, California's own homegirl walking onto that red carpet to cast that deciding 51st vote. It doesn't get more dramatic than that. That aside, not knowing what the outcome will be for January 5th in the state of Georgia. And by the way, in Dalton, Georgia, it's a majority Latino town, which is the carpet capital of the world. So at Cal State LA and every industrial park in California, in the US, Latinos made those carpets. It's a carpet town. It is all that carpet that we walk on in all these offices. Those are Latinos who made those carpets, FYI. So they have a huge role to play in the Georgia U.S. senatorial election come January 5th, a little less than 2 months from now. But executive orders, obviously, with regards to ICE raids, we have to stop the ICE raids immediately in tearing families apart in our own neighborhoods. So that can be done executively because ICE falls under Homeland Security, which falls under the executive branch of the US federal government, which is the White House. And this is a law enforcement agency that's been highly politicized and weaponized by the current administration. So ICE, clearly eliminate and stop all the raids, right now. 2 is they need to reunify immediately all of the children that are in cages, all the young men and women, the teenagers with their parents. And not just unite them, but also compensate them as well. And also talk about, Dolores, when we talked about the issue of psychotherapeutic services, can you imagine what these children are feeling, the sense of abandonment, the sense of loneliness, the sense of, this was legally sanctioned kidnapping by the United States of America of these young children. So those children have to be united with their parents, reunited with their parents immediately. And that's what they can do through an executive order. Dealing with dreamers, TPS, we can reverse the TPS orders for all of the Central Americans and Haitians who finally are under that temporary protective order right now and dealing with our DACA students. Know one thing, for all the dreamers who are watching today, the dreamers is not a legislative law. DACA is not statutory. So it wasn't run through the Congress or the US Senate. This was an executive order by the White House, by then President Barack Obama. But the ascendancy and where it got to the level where it's at today is because of the activism and organizing of the dreamers, which politicized the situation. Very similar to when I cut my teeth politically organizing and marching for 187. It is the very same thing. So mis respetos to all of the dreamer activists, because quite frankly, it would never have come to reality if they did not put the political pressure, because this wasn't an original proposal from the White House, from the executive branch. It was the dreamers who put the pressure on the White House that put them in a position that they made the executive order. If it wasn't for the organizers of the dreamers, DACA would never have come to fruition. And that's why, activism, advocacy is so very important.
A national issue, actually international, but and bring it to local. So Kevin, we know Measure J passed, and we've had some people ask about specifically that divestment in police here in Los Angeles. And then more specifically, someone's asking about your thoughts about the movement, again, this activism of students to abolish campus police at Cal State's UC campuses. And so just some thoughts about that, because we do have Measure J that passed.
Well, I think with Measure J, we have an opportunity to sort of revisualize and re-envision the type of city, the type of county, the type of state that we want, that if we're going to adhere to the status quo of investing, almost exclusively, or at least a majority of our budget into law enforcement, as opposed to more financial aid for students at Cal State Los Angeles, for example, more investments in STEM programs, for Latinas and Latinos and African-American boys and girls and Asian-American boys and girls, where can we make, proactive investments that our return on investment on the back end will be much higher, as opposed to the current status quo of investing more in law enforcement. Those are serious questions that are on the table. And I think the first biggest step was the passage of Measure J. Now, I will say, this is something I think they could have passed as county board of supervisors. I don't think you needed an initiative to do it, which I thought was a very interesting thing to do, because it's not a overwhelmingly, Republican dominated and controlled, county board of supervisors. I thought that was interesting, but they go through the process that they go through. But we're at an inflection point, Dolores, where we can reimagine the type of city that we want, a city that's inclusive, a city that is truly, diverse, but a city that invests in its youth, a city that invests in those at the lowest economic strata, because this is one of the wealthiest cities and clearly the wealthiest state and the wealthiest nation on planet Earth. And the fact that the inequities are growing even more so, the fact that the coronavirus 19, that 125,000 Latinos have died in LA County. The second highest are whites at 25,000. The third highest are African Americans at 9,999. Those were the latest numbers about a week and a half ago. Things are fluid, so numbers have increased. But that number is so huge, 125,000. So that speaks to the inequities and who gets access to PCR diagnostic examinations, who doesn't. Who has to be forced to work, because if they don't work, and guess what? Then they're going to be evicted from their apartments, and then their children are going to be living on the streets, in cars, and who takes the brunt. So we have a lot of major issues still, to grapple with as policymakers, and to truly reimagine the type of LA that we really want. We've learned a lot of lessons from Prop 187, and a lot of it's about political power as well too. That this will never ever happen, at least in my lifetime, ever again, in the city, in the state of California. But we don't know what the future holds like, because instead of people taking lessons from California and saying, wow, look what happened in California.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, you see the ascendancy of so many Latinos now who hold positions of power and who've been moving driver's license bill, 100% clean, renewable energy, sanctuary state, and so forth. If you're in a red state, you're saying, well, we don't want that, to happen, but they're doing quite the opposite. They're actually falling to the trap of Pete Wilson for short-term political gain, which is a very Pyrrhic victory, which is a victory they secure, but it's going to be at a very high cost, because what will happen nationwide, I think eventually over the course of time, what happened in California is going to happen, nationwide across. And I think the GOP, the Republicans, not to be partisan, and be respectful for those who are across the political spectrum here today, but I think it's going to have a huge negative impact on the GOP at a nationwide level. They may have secured short-term victories, a very Pyrrhic victory, but it's going to come at a very high cost. And I think we witnessed it, we're living it, we're experiencing it in California today.
Kevin, how is it that people don't realize how strong the Latina community is in environmental issues? You look at your record where environment might be the top issue that you're best known for. You went to Paris on the climate change accord. When they're looking for appointments in Washington, I worry sometimes that they pigeonhole groups and say, well, this would be kind of a good seat for somebody from this community and that community.
HUD.
But environmental issues, like you look at Southeast LA and East LA and some of the buildings that are built and some of the issues involving freeways and other issues, this is a devastating issue. And there's no reason not to perceive the role that leaders like yourself are playing in environmental and other issues, should be able to play in all of these, should be seen as playing in all of these policies. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I'm just curious because you've been such an environmental leader.
I think where you're going with this, Rafe, is sort of the narrative that has been constructed and who dominates the environmental space. And I think some of the world's biggest environmentalists have been and actually are Latino. The Global Warming Solutions Act, AB 32, we saw a little a clip of that, obviously. Then Speaker Fabian Nunez. This comes at the heels of the Kyoto Protocols that were huge, and the Kyoto Protocols were largely ignored by the George W. Bush administration. So a lot of the world's scientists were in a deep funk of depression because there were no standards globally set. Then all of a sudden, the fifth largest economy on planet Earth moves forward and says, we're going to legally dedicate ourselves to reducing carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide emissions, by the year 2050, and it's going to have a sharp tip of the spear because it's going to be legal. Who moved that bill with a sense of political force? It was an assemblywoman named Fran Pavley, but there was this Latino guy too, named Fabian Nunez. And if it wasn't for him, the Global Warming Solutions Act would never have come to fruition. You also have, a Latino who's the Pope right now. Pope is Francisco, is the Pope Francis. La Encíclica. La Encíclica is very powerful. When he released that from the Vatican, talking about climate change and how it disproportionately impacts people of color, the most vulnerable globally. That was very, very powerful, that a Pope from the Vatican unleashed, La Encyclica. Also I'm having a little brain fog right now, but the former secretary for climate change to then UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon. She's from Costa Rica. If someone can do a real quick check on her for right now, we're good friends. She's located in Bonn, Germany right now. A Latina woman, incredibly powerful. She came visited me in our state capital. She's a powerful, strong Latina woman. When you saw the picture at the Conference of Parties, when the deal was finally landed, and you saw Ban Ki-moon, then UN Secretary, and the President of France, Francois Hollande. Then you saw this other woman with her hands up next to Hollande. That was, ay Dios mío. Someone help me. Someone send me a tweet. And then obviously, 100% clean renewable energy, SB 100. That is, California is the largest legal jurisdiction in the United States and in the world to legally commit itself to decarbonizing the grid by the year 2045. I think we'll get there by 2035. But I made a decision that I was not going to be sort of typecast and sort of boxed into only environmental justice, which is very important. Environmental justice for frontline communities is absolutely very important. However, the subtext for me too, Rafe and Dolores, was I didn't want to be like, okay, well, you take care of those chemical plants next to brown communities and black communities. We'll take care of the big. Cristina Figueres. Julian. Yeah, I hope Cristina does find this out. Cristina Figueres. A very good friend. I'm having a brain fog right now. But I wanted to say I wanted to do the whole climate change. And representing California with Jerry Brown and actually going to. Being invited by the Pontifical Academy of Sciences by Pope Francis to give a speech in the Vatican. I spent the whole week there, and you had scientists from Cambridge, from Oxford, from Yale, Harvard, and to give a keynote speech there through a perspective of a Latino was something that was a real it was just an awesome thing for me. I had never been to Italy in my life, so it's the first time I had went there in Rome, and I spent the whole week over there, going every single day into the Vatican, leaving late at night. But it was a Latino doing that. We weren't just talking about issues within the barrio, and there has been elitism within the environmental world, really deep elitism within the environmental world, and that's why I talk about owning our space. That's why I'm talking about, saying, we have to break through that, imposter syndrome. I'm sure there's a lot of Latinos, Dolores, who get their PhD, and if they get, tenureship or not, or just landing on the campus, they're like, oh my God, imposter syndrome, because we don't feel like we belong. Right. Or we feel like our peers are looking at us very differently, or like affirmative action, how we were meant to felt we were secondary. Like, oh, no, man, hey, I'm proud. I'm affirmative action baby, beneficiary. If it wasn't for affirmative action, I wouldn't be here. Other people had their affirmative action. It's called their zip codes where they were born. It was called all the academic enrichment and every single opportunity they have been given to them. And that's when you get a Latino immigrant, DACA dreamer, who ends up at UCLA or Cal State LA or Stanford. Man, they had to maneuver through all kinds of major obstacles just to get there. And that in itself is a major accomplishment for young Black students and young Latino students and young poor Asian American students and even young poor white students right there, that we belong. And these movements, Prop 187, these historical movements, they propel us to be a better society, to force us to be a better society and to confront our demons as a society that we truly belong, regardless of who we are and where we come from. So that, I kind of went on a tangent on the environmental question, but the environmental part is very important, Rafe, because when it comes to the devastating impacts of carbon dioxide equivalent, NOx, SOx, particularly at 2.5, what we know is ozone, which you would breathe into our lungs every single day, that disproportionately impacts people of color, Latinos, Latino immigrants, and African Americans, and having a leading voice there and pushing up on the issue, instead of saying, well, you know what, I'm just going to deal with the chemical plant, you know, in this neighborhood because that's all they'll let me do. You know, you got to push up.
It was a wonderful answer, and you've also got 3 or 4 people sending in information about the person that you had.
Cristina Figueres, yeah,
the entire audience is weighing in to help you out.
We won't tell that you
but
blinked
can I
on
say
her
something?
name.
People often don't link that. That's a fascinating thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pope Francis, La Encíclica, very powerful because that sent a very strong message to many institutions throughout the world. Cristina Figueres, Fabian Nunez, you know, myself, they don't link it that way. You know, when we think about, you know, someone had asked me, who are your environmental heroes? You know, I was, New York Times interviewed me, and I was stunned. I was stumped, I should say, because I was like, I don't have any, you know. My mom, she's clean houses. That's why, you know, my hero is, you know. I just want trees. I want, you know, shade. You know, I want clean air, you know, to breathe for our children, as opposed to all the freeways, all the cement and concrete and asphalt that we have to live in every single day. And that's about political power. And that's about saying, hey, you know what? We're not going to allow local politicians, non-elected planners to say, this is where we build freeways. Next to Cal City, LA, the 10 freeway that tears apart East LA, City Terrace, and El Sereno. And this is over there, we're going to build parks. And we're going to keep open space over there. So children over there can have green grass grow underneath their feet. The kids over here in Boyle Heights and East LA and Ramona Gardens projects right down the road street from Cal City, LA. Well, guess what? They'll have cement and asphalt and concrete grow underneath their feet. Well, it won't grow, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
Well, Kevin, yeah, go ahead, Dolores. We're at closing comments now.
yeah. I was just going to say thank you for the.
Well, I was just beginning. Oh, I just got me riled up.
Well, and we haven't been able to get all the questions, but I just want to say thank you for the environmental work that you've done. And in our department, we actually have an environmental justice class that goes macro also, that big picture, to make sure students get exposed to that. And there's some amazing faculty who are teaching in that. I think we are running out of time, but we wanted to give you the last word, and hoping that I think given we've had faculty, staff, students, community members on here, but a number of students, a number of classrooms came. I'm wondering if you have some words for students in terms of, we have seen this activism that's happening, and maybe where they can go with that. And also students who are feeling disillusioned. There was one comment, somebody who said, I voted for Biden, but felt like it was kind of a choice between, it's still not radical enough. It's still not changing our underlying systems. And so maybe some words for those students who are involved in the activism, or those that are just kind of still feeling like it's not happening, and the changes in the way that we want them.
Well, I could say this, that this is an inflection point in our nation's history. And this is an extraordinary point in our nation's history. And it's also very exciting, actually, because in the ashes of the passage of 187, you know, rose a phoenix, which were, you know, Gil Cedillo and Fabian Nunez and others, and yours truly, who spoke truth to power and moved policies and used political capital to force people to vote on a whole host of measures, giving healthcare to undocumented children, you know, which Ricardo Lara and I did together while we were in the state Senate, giving driver's license to immigrants, you know, 20 years after the fact, after they were taken away, by the way, by Democrats, actually. A Democrat, Harvard, West Point educated, who became Secretary of the Army under Bill Clinton, and who became eventually the president of the University of New Mexico, Luis Caldera. He was a co-author of that measure representing Boyle Heights right there. So, you know, this is also a very opportunistic time and an incredible time for continued sustained involvement to improve the human condition for all individuals. Not just, you know, doing the tweeting but actually volunteering and helping, you know, the unhoused and immigrant communities who are suffering greatly because they have been prohibited from working to pay for the roof over their head, that rent, because of the COVID-19. This is an incredible opportunity to really get involved and ignite it. I'm seeing so many young folks, and I'm really amazingly excited by the young folks. Remember one thing, when we have really bad times and it feels like the whole weight is on our shoulders and just crushing us, there's always, a silver lining behind this. And with 187, there was a huge movement that rose as a result. I know that now folks are not totally happy, with the election, and they had other candidates in the primary. I understand that. But this is an opportunity to make sure that through executive actions, what we want, what we need as a community is fulfilled. And that's why activism and advocacy and voting is so critical. So I'm excited for the new chapter, post 187, what it means, learning about our history, about 187, which is so important, being present, and what the new chapter will look like for all Californians and for all Angelenos. Rafe and Dolores, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you very much for giving me an opportunity. It's an honor for me to share a few words and experiences. And once again, I thank you for this opportunity. Gracias.
Well, Kevin, I have to say on behalf of everybody you can't see right now, unless you look at the chat, which is running wild, and the Q&A running wild, it has been wonderful having you here, inspirational. And you've always been a friend of Cal State LA, and we know you're going to be in our lives as an institution and as people.
Go Eagles.
Thank you for everything. It was great. We are recording this, remember, folks, so you can watch it again. We'll post it when the recording is ready. And we are thrilled at how many people came and participated. And Dolores, wonderful working with you on this.
Absolutely, Rafe. Enjoyed it, and glad that we could, the department could co-sponsor. Thank you, Kevin.
Wonderful. And Kevin, thank you all again, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.